Hi folks, Dave, the Honest Audiophile. This is the Tanchjim for you, and these are my Honest Audiophile impressions. I want to thank HifiGo for providing the Tanchjim for you for a review. Do greatly appreciate it. HifiGo, you rock. Alright, so the Tanchjim for you. This will set you back $70 from your bank account, and it is a DMT4 Ultra LCP diaphragm dynamic driver with dual chamber. 32 ohms of impedance, 122 decibels of sensitivity, and a frequency response range of 8 Hz to 48 kHz. The Tanchjim for you comes in a pretty standard Tanchjim unboxing experience, so I'm not going to take it all apart and show you, but you do get a nice picture here on the front with some branding and then some specs on the back side. You get a little carry-in pouch that says Tanchjim on it. Drawstrings. It'll protect your IEMs from scratches, but it's not really going to protect it from drops. And then you get two different types of silicone tips. You get the more normal, average grape olive shaped narrow bore tip, and then you get the more shallow wide bore tip. I preferred the wide bore tip just because it fit me better, and also the presentation. With the olive grape shape, you got a little bit more bass, but it also enhanced the upper mids presentation, and I found it was a little bit more V-shaped and more aggressive with the grape olive shaped tips versus the wide bore narrower tip, which were actually more comfortable. And then you also get this little carrying tool to adjust the bass filters, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. And then you get the Tanchjim for you. Now, the Tanchjim for you is very well built. Metal shell does have a little faceplate here that says for you, and it is rather shiny and reflective. Also, fingerprint magnet. Your cable connects with 2-pin. The for you is fairly thin. Doesn't really have an ergonomic back. You do have this little step-up system, and then a fairly long nozzle with a decent angle. The for you feels well built, and it just looks really, really nice. And for $70, it seems like it's a very good price tag for its build quality. On the back side of the shell, you have your little setup for the filters, and you can see that there's a screw arrow in that little hole, and the arrow points to which filter. The outside one here is natural. The filter on top is your pop filter. The one directly up against the shell is your atmosphere, and then the one down below is reference. And the filters definitely do make a difference. We'll talk about that when we get to the sound impressions. I find that the shell design makes for you to be quite comfortable, and I have no problems wearing them for hours upon hours on end. No issues whatsoever with comfort. And even though they're a little bit heavy being metal shells, I just find them to be extremely comfortable and very, very small. The flat shell does not bother me. I was rather surprised by that. They do fit extremely well. Outside noises and isolation is pretty good. Probably about 60-65% of outside noise is being blocked, so most things around the house are going to be blocked for the most part, or muffled quite well. Louder things, vacuum cleaners, coffee grinders, cars going by on the outside, you're definitely going to hear them. They're going to be muffled, but you're going to hear them. Now, using the grape olive shaped tip does help a little bit to isolate better, but you're still not getting, a premium noise canceling type of presentation here of outside noises being blocked, but they do a good job for what they are, in my opinion. Carrying on conversations, all you have to do is pause the music, and if the person is talking loud enough, you can hear them. But I found it was easier just to pop one out. The cable of the 4U Pro is actually quite nice. It is a little bit weak when it comes to ear hooks. I wish they had more tension, but it's a nice and lightweight cable, very thin, and feels very, very nice. And it's actually quite well controlled. And then you have a nice cinch, and it terminates into a 3.5. I find that the cable is very, very nice. I have no complaints about this cable. It's one of the nicer cables for an IEM in this price point. I do wish, though, that it had a little bit more tension on those ear hooks, just to kind of hold the 4U in place a little bit better. The Tanchjim 4U is fairly easy to drive. 32 ohms of impedance and 122 decibels of sensitivity. The 4U is a little bit picky when it comes to its source. I found that sources that are a little bit more cold, analytical leaning tended to be a little bit more aggressive and not as pleasurable to listen to. And something that was a little bit more natural, had a little bit of warmth to it, was my preference. And the 4U played very well on everything that I put it on, whether it was a dongle, a DAP, or desktop. Had no issues there whatsoever. The Tanchjim 4U is very unique in its sound presentation because it does have 4 different filters, but these filters pretty much only affect the bass. I say pretty much because one of them does affect the mids more than all of the others. So let's start with the atmosphere and pop filters. Both of those filters are very much the more bassy filter. If you want some bass, I would use either the pop or atmosphere filter. They do extend more into the sub bass. You get a little bit more rumble and grumble, and there's a little bit more mid bass impact and slam. But both of them bleed into the lower mids. They both have a little bit of warmth to them. And also they are not as well controlled. They do have more impact, slam, punch, but even then they're not really that heavy hitting of a bass. And I was able to listen to them. They just had a more of a fun factor than the other two. And I found that the reference filter had the least amount of bass, was really quite rolled off. You really did not get anything in the sub bass, and the mid bass was very, very lackluster, almost anemic. There was not much punch and slam there at all. The upper bass and lower mids regions, there was no bleeding there at all, and you lost that warmth. And the reference filter also, or monitoring filter as they call it, also affected the mids. And the mids were thinner sounding and a little bit more aggressive in their presentation and more forthright in their presentation. And I just found that the monitoring filter, reference filter, whatever you want to call that filter, it was just not as pleasurable. So the natural filter was the one that I used, and I found that the natural filter had nice mid-bass punch and slam and a little bit of sub-bass. It could have used a little bit more sub-bass, but you did get some rumble and grumble there. And I found that it was very balanced between having just enough of an impact and slam and also being more neutral and having good details and resolution and nice tone and timbre. Overall, though, the whole bass presentation is not a very heavy hitting bass. It has just enough to keep the toes tapping, depending on which filter you're using. And also it has nice tone and timbre and good details and resolution. It's more about the quality than the quantity, no matter what the filter you're using. The mids of the 4U are also very natural sounding. They have nice tone and timbre, and they have a cohesion about them, a nice balance about them, and everything plays together very well. There's no unevenness or peakiness. None of the octaves within the mids regions are fighting for attention and trying to be dominant. Everything is very well balanced. And I found that the mids have a nice amount of details and resolution, good amount of air without being too aggressive and forthright unless you're using the monitoring reference filter. And overall, they stay within their designated area and play well with both the bass and the treble without competing anywhere, and it's a very balanced and cohesive sound. The treble of the 4U extends nicely, has nice sparkle and energy. Using that reference monitoring filter does bring out a little bit more, especially in that lower treble region, and it can be a bit aggressive and fatiguing sounding depending on the source you're using. I found that overall, though, the treble extends nicely. There's good air, there's nice space, and nice sparkle and energy without being too forthright and too aggressive in its presentation. And it has nice natural tone and timbre, just like the mids and the bass. So overall, I find that the bass, the mids, and the treble on the natural filter are very cohesive, very balanced, have a natural presentation, and they just work together very well, and everything sounds pleasurable without being artificially enhanced or being just boring and downright bleh. I find that they have a nice balance between a neutral and natural, and adding in just enough of the fun factor to keep everything going. The soundstage of the 4U is very, very natural. It is not the most wide of stages, no matter what filter you're using. Even using the atmospheric filter does not enhance the soundstage and bring out this big, huge stage. It just kind of adds in a little bit more depth and layering. And I found that overall, using the natural filter, you have this natural sound stage that represents and portrays different venues very well: small, medium, large, and even if something goes grand, it does get a little bit larger sounding. And then the depth of the 4U is nice. You can look into the stage several rows, and it also does a good job with layering. I did find that with the pop and atmosphere filters, that on busier, bassier, more complex tracks, that the bass got a little confused, a little muddled and jumbled up at times. And then the detail retrieval and resolution of the, I'm sorry, I skipped over a section. The imaging of the 4U is very good. It tracks things across the stage, and you can place things where they are, and you can go, oh, that's right there, and follow it across. It's right, center, left. There's no gaps and spaces in between. It tracks things very well. It's not the most precise and pinpoint of laser point, imaging, but you can lock on and follow things across, and it's kind of in this area right here. Detail retrieval and resolution are very good for the 4U. I found that it does a nice job of bringing in all the information. You're not really going to miss anything, but at the same time, you're not going to really be pulling out new treasures either. But you're not going to be lacking anything. You're not going to be going, man, I wish I could hear more details. They're all there. And then what it does bring out, it resolves very well. There's no harshness, glariness, smearedness, anything of that sort, except for on that reference filter. At times it can be a little bit too much, and it just kind of reveals all the flaws, and it will be a little bit aggressive in its presentation. Tone and timbre. The tone and timbre of the 4U actually took me by surprise. I was rather impressed at the amount of note weight that it has, and also how natural and accurate instruments were being reproduced. I found everything sounded very true. The only one that sounded somewhat artificial was that reference monitoring. I found that was a little too thin, and at times made especially strings and brass instruments sound a little bit artificial. But overall, I found that the tone and timbre to be very accurate and true. So the Tanchjim 4U, as I was listening to it, I was like, what does this remind me of? This reminds me of another IEM that I truly love. And that IEM that it reminded me of is the Tin Hifi T2. I found that the Tin Hifi T2 is a little bit more linear in its approach. It does extend out farther on both ends, but also at the same time, it's not quite as forthright and aggressive in its presentation, especially in the upper mids and lower treble regions when you're using that reference monitor on the 4U. I found that the T2 has a more natural and accurate note weight. The 4U can be a bit thin at times, especially depending on what filter. But if you're using the pop and atmosphere filter, it has a little bit more. On the natural filter, they're pretty close, but I think the T2 has just a little bit more naturalism. And then in the treble regions, the T2 is a little bit more extended, does have a little bit more crispness and a little bit bite. The 4U is more detailed and better resolving. The T2 holds its own though, and is still a very solid option when it comes to monitoring. I do find that if you are going to use the 4U for monitoring, I would use the natural filter instead of that reference monitoring filter. So the Tanchjim 4U, I like this IEM quite a bit, and I'm rather impressed by it. And it is a solid option in its price point. It has very nice natural tone and timbre, good detail retrieval and resolution, and it has the option to go fun or to be a workhorse. And it can be used on the stage, and you don't have to worry about being thrown off in your mixes with artificial sounding tone and timbre unless you're using the wrong filter. And I really do enjoy the Tanchjim 4U. Highly recommend it if you're looking for a budget stage monitor that has a natural presentation. It's been Dave, the Honest Audiophile. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. Speaking of next video, somewhere on the screen, subscription links, notification bells. If you haven't already, please check those off. Don't forget to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the video. Check out all the links down below. There's all kinds of information down there regarding how you can contact the channel, follow the channel, support the channel. All that kind of stuff is listed down below. Speaking of supporting the channel, I want to thank my supporters through Patreon and YouTube memberships. Thank you very much for all that you provide to the channel. It's much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting the channel, there's various ways that you can do that through one-time gifts with PayPal, Venmo, and also YouTube options. And if you're wanting to support it on a monthly basis, you can do that through YouTube memberships and Patreon. With using YouTube and Patreon, you can get access to videos early, and also if you want to join my private Discord server, all you have to do is ask. If you're interested in supporting the channel, it'd be greatly appreciated. Also, check out all the other links down below. There's all kinds of information regarding gear recommendations, music recommendations, and all kinds of other things. So check out the links down below. And lastly, don't forget to enjoy the music, and that honesty is the best policy.